What if I told you that the world you stand on today is built upon scars? Scars carved by walls of ice taller than mountains, by floods that drowned entire countries, and by winters so brutal they nearly extinguished humanity itself. The Ice Age was not a single frozen moment, but a relentless gauntlet, a cycle of destruction and rebirth that tested every living thing. Mammoths roamed like moving fortresses. Saber-toothed cats ruled the shadows, and humans, fragile and few, clung to life with nothing but fire, bone, and memory. But the strangest truth is this: the Ice Age never truly left us. Its fingerprints linger in our rivers, our coastlines, our DNA. And the story it tells is not of defeat, but of endurance, of how Earth itself bent, broke, and remade itself beneath the weight of frozen time. Settle in and let the frost close around you. The winds are rising, the glaciers are whispering, and history is about to open its oldest chapter. Tonight, we step into that frozen world to uncover what the Earth endured and what it left behind for us to remember. The night is still. Imagine yourself standing on the threshold of a world at once familiar and utterly alien. Before you stretches not the map of modern Earth, but a vast expanse locked beneath ice. White cliffs of frozen mass tower higher than any cathedral, stretching farther than your eyes can follow. Winds whip down from their ridges, sharp enough to sting the skin, carrying with them the fine dust of a world transformed. Beneath the pale sky, the land is quiet, too quiet. Yet here, in this silence, begins the story of endurance. This is not a single season of winter, nor even a lifetime of harsh years. This is the Ice Age, an era that lasted for millions of years in cycles, sculpting continents and reshaping the lives of every creature that walked, swam, or flew. To endure such a world was not simply to survive the cold, it was to inhabit a planet remade, where rivers froze, seas withdrew, and every horizon carried the shadow of glaciers. Earth did not merely witness this age, it bore it, layer upon layer, as ice pressed into stone and wind stripped the land bare. Scientists today uncover its record in the most delicate of places, deep within the ice itself. In Greenland and Antarctica, core samples drilled from glaciers reveal tiny bubbles of air trapped for hundreds of thousands of years. Within these fragile spheres lies the atmosphere of the ancient Earth, frozen snapshots of carbon dioxide levels, oxygen ratios, and the delicate balance of gases that tell us how the planet breathed in ages past. Each layer is a chapter, each bubble, a whisper of how Earth endured. The endurance was not gentle. Glaciers advanced like armies, slow but relentless, grinding down mountains into valleys, scattering boulders like dice across the plains. When they retreated, they left behind scars, U-shaped valleys, striated rocks, and immense basins that would one day hold the Great Lakes. These were not passive marks of erosion, they were the signatures of struggle. The Earth reshaped under a burden of frozen weight, and yet, even beneath such crushing change, life persisted. On the tundra south of the glaciers, herds of woolly mammoths trudged through the snow, their curved tusks cutting arcs in the pale light. Saber-toothed cats crouched low in the frost-stiffened grass, their muscles tight, eyes locked on the young and the weak. Wolves, larger and fiercer than their modern kin, followed the scent of the herds. In this frozen wilderness, size itself was a form of endurance. To be large meant to carry warmth within, to survive the endless hunger of winter nights. Farther still, in pockets of warmth near rivers and forests, humans huddled together around fires. To them, the Ice Age was not a scientific concept. It was life itself. They shaped stone into blades, stitched furs into clothing, and carved memories into bone. A mammoth's rib might become the frame of a shelter, its hide a wall against the wind. Fire was their shield, light against the cold and the predators pressing in from the dark. Every act of survival was also an act of defiance. But what does it mean to say Earth endured? It is to recognize that the planet itself changed form under the pressure of ice. Mountains were bowed, rivers rerouted, oceans shrank by more than 100 meters as water became locked in frozen sheets. Coastlines stretched outward, revealing lands that had never before seen the sun. What had been sea turned to plains. What had been green forest turned to dust. And still, the earth continued, carrying forward in slow, unyielding rhythm. The endurance was not without rhythm. The ice did not arrive all at once, but crept forward in waves. Advance, retreat, advance again. Each movement a pulse of deep time, too vast for any human to measure, but carved into stone all the same. To us it feels like silence. To Earth it was a heartbeat. Imagine then standing at the edge of a glacier. The wall rises before you, pale blue where the sun cuts into its depth. The air is heavy, filled with the low groan of shifting ice, a sound so deep it feels less heard than felt in your bones. This is the weight of endurance, the sound of a planet reshaping itself not in decades or centuries, but in epochs. The Ice Age did not merely freeze the world, it tested it. It forced every living thing to adapt or vanish, and it forced Earth itself to carry scars that remain with us still. To understand what the planet endured is to recognize that every valley, every coastline, every whisper of wind across a low S-plane is a survivor's mark. The world we walk today is not separate from the Ice Age. It is its legacy. And yet this is only the beginning. For if the first mark of endurance was the coming of the ice, the deeper story lies in the cycles that followed. What force drew glaciers across continents? What rhythm held Earth between deep freeze and warmth? To answer this, we must turn not to the land, but to the heavens, and to the subtle movements of a planet dancing around its sun. The world does not freeze by accident. The cold that draped continents in ice, that carved valleys and buried forests, was not a single event, but the breath of a planet. It was long, slow, patient, so patient that no one life could sense its change. And yet, when we step back far enough, we can see it. The steady rhythm of Earth inhaling ice and exhaling warmth. To understand the endurance of the Ice Age, we must look beyond the snowdrifts and frozen herds, beyond the glaciers themselves, and out into the geometry of the heavens. For the origins of this frozen world were written not only in rock and water, but in the tilt of the Earth, its orbit around the sun, and its gentle wobble as it spun. In the early 20th century, a Serbian mathematician named Milutin Milankovic studied these cosmic cycles. He saw that Earth's orbit is not fixed, but stretches and relaxes over spans of about 100,000 years. He measured the tilt of Earth's axis, sometimes leaning farther, sometimes straighter, over cycles of 41,000 years. And he recognized that our planet wobbles like a spinning top, losing speed, shifting the timing of its seasons over 23,000 years. Each of these changes is slight, almost imperceptible, but together they determine how much sunlight falls on the northern hemisphere in summer. Too little warmth and the winter's snow lingers. Snow that lingers becomes ice, and once ice grows, it invites more of itself. This is the quiet machinery of the Ice Age. Earth did not endure a single catastrophe, but a cycle. An inhale of cold, a pause, an exhale of warmth. Each glacial advance was the accumulation of summers too weak to melt the snow of the year before. Each retreat was the slow yielding of ice under stronger suns. To walk across the land in those times was to tread upon the visible result of invisible motions written in the heavens. The evidence is preserved not only in theory, but in the records of the Earth itself. Deep-sea sediments, layered grain by grain across millennia, contain isotopes of oxygen that reveal the temperature of the water in which they formed. By studying these isotopes, scientists traced the same cycles Milankovic had calculated, etched in mud beneath the ocean floor. The match was unmistakable, orbital rhythms and climatic breath moving in lockstep. Yet the picture grows clearer still when we listen to the voices of ice. From Greenland and Antarctica, cores drilled deep into glaciers show bands as thin as a fingernail, each one a layer of snowfall pressed into time. Within these layers are tiny bubbles of ancient air, atmospheres from a world tens of thousands of years gone. They record not only the chill of long winters, but the sudden warming of brief interludes and the violent return of cold again. To hold such a core is to cradle the memory of Earth's breath in your hands. But cycles alone do not tell the whole story. Earth is not a machine that turns predictably without interruption. Other forces amplify the rhythm. When ice expands, it reflects sunlight back into space, cooling the planet further. When seas grow colder, they draw down carbon dioxide, thinning the blanket of greenhouse gases and plunging the world deeper into chill. Volcanic eruptions throw ash into the sky, dimming the sun for years at a time. Ocean currents shift, redistributing heat or locking it away in the abyss. Each feedback adds to the endurance, a chorus of forces conspiring to make the cold deeper and longer. The endurance was not uniform. Some ages froze harder, others thawed more quickly. Sudden jolts punctuated the long rhythm. In ice cores from Greenland, scientists have discovered sharp spikes in temperature, abrupt shifts that occurred in decades, not millennia. For those living through them, the Earth must have seemed unstable, a world whose seasons no longer followed the memory of ancestors. In myths and oral traditions, fragments of these upheavals may linger. Stories of sudden storms, of endless winters, of worlds remade in the blink of a generation. Consider, for example, the Great Lakes that sometimes formed behind glacial walls. A frozen barrier could hold back water for centuries, until one day it gave way. The sudden outburst would send a rush of cold, fresh water into the oceans, disrupting currents that carried warmth across hemispheres. Such events may have triggered mini-ice ages, short but fierce, that reshaped lives for generations. To endure them was not to adapt gradually, but to be hurled into new climates without warning. And yet, in the midst of these upheavals, life adapted. Mammoths and bison followed the grass as it shifted with the cold. Forests advanced and retreated, each leaf a response to the tilt of the axis. Humans, too, learned to read the land, to follow the herds when the cold pressed south, and to return north when warmth pulled the ice away. Their migrations were not random wanderings, but synchronies with the breath of the planet. In a sense, they were dancers moving in step with the great cycles of Earth itself. What is remarkable is not only that the Earth endured these swings, but that it carried them in silence. No mountain could feel its erosion. No river could sense its redirection. Yet together they bore the cycles, leaving us landscapes carved by rhythms too slow to hear. The endurance of the planet was not a matter of resistance, but of patience. Picture yourself in that ancient world. The sky is pale, the air sharp. For centuries, summers have been just a little cooler, so that last year's snow remains at your feet, even as the new flakes begin to fall. You cannot see the orbit shifting. You cannot feel the wobble of the planet, but you live inside its consequence. Your horizon is filled with a glacier that has crept forward, foot by foot in silence. Behind you, the forests retreat, the rivers shrink, the winds pick up dust. And still, the sun rises and sets as though nothing has changed. This is what it means to endure. Not a single battle, but an unending tide. The Earth held its balance across millions of years, swaying between freeze and thaw, breath and stillness, never fully one thing or the other. And in that balance, life adapted, faltered, and rose again. The question that remains is one we still ask today. Are we passengers on this cosmic rhythm, forever shaped by cycles beyond our control? Or do we now hold enough power to alter the breath of the planet itself? Where do you stand? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to know your perspective. And if you enjoy wandering through mysteries like these, consider subscribing so we can keep exploring the hidden rhythms of Earth together. The Earth does not move quickly. Its greatest changes arrive not as sudden storms but as long marches, each step too slow for a single lifetime to witness. Glaciers were such armies, vast rivers of ice advancing inch by inch, yet powerful enough to remake entire continents. To endure them was to live in a world reshaped by their crushing weight. Picture a mountain range before the ice. Peaks rise jagged and sharp, their slopes clothed in forests, rivers tracing silver paths through valleys. Now imagine the slow arrival of a glacier. Snow falls year after year, refusing to melt in the weak summer sun. The weight builds. Layer presses upon layer, compressing snow into ice until gravity pulls the mass downslope. The glacier begins to flow, not like water, but like stone learning to move. It grinds forward, unstoppable. The Laurentide ice sheet in North America was one of these frozen armies. At its height, it covered more than 13 million square kilometers, stretching from the Arctic Ocean to what is now New York, from the Rocky Mountains to the Atlantic. Its ice was so thick that in places it rose higher than today's Mount Rainier, more than 3 kilometers above the land. Beneath its crushing mass, the crust of the earth bent downward. Mountains bowed, valleys deepened, rivers were dammed and rerouted. Across the Atlantic, the Fennoscandian ice sheet blanketed Scandinavia and northern Europe, its edge pushing southward across what is now Germany and Poland. In the southern hemisphere, smaller but still formidable glaciers crowned the Andes and carved valleys in New Zealand. The world had become a kingdom of ice. These armies did not march silently. To stand at their edge was to hear the groan of shifting mass, the sharp crack of fractures splitting deep into blue depths. Meltwater pooled at their bases, bursting forth in sudden torrents that carved channels across the land. Boulders the size of houses were plucked from their birthplaces and carried for hundreds of kilometers before being dropped, stranded in alien fields. These glacial erratics remain today, mute witnesses to journeys few could imagine. The valleys they left behind told their own story. Rivers carve V-shapes, narrow and winding. Glaciers carve U-shapes, wide and deep, with sheer walls that speak of weight pressing down and dragging forward. Even now, hikers trace these valleys in the Alps, the Rockies, the fjords of Norway, walking through scars left by frozen armies long since retreated. The endurance of Earth under these glaciers was not passive. The land bent and rebounded. When the ice pressed down, the crust sank. When it melted away, the crust slowly rose again, a process still unfolding today in Scandinavia and Canada. The land itself remembers the weight of ice, and even after 12,000 years of freedom, it is still rising millimetre by millimetre, shaking off the burden of the past. For life, the endurance was sharper. Imagine a herd of mammoths standing before the glacial front. The air is colder than anything we know today, the sky pale and empty. Grass grows in sparse patches, tough and brittle. Predators lurk at the edges, but all eyes are drawn to the wall of ice looming on the horizon. It does not charge, yet it advances. It does not roar, yet it devours forests, rivers, and hills alike. For humans and animals alike, the glacier's edge was the edge of the world. To endure such forces required movement. Herds migrated southward as the ice pressed down. Hunters followed, their paths weaving in rhythm with the glacier's advance and retreat. Campsites shifted, leaving behind bones, tools, and fire pits now buried beneath layers of sediment. Survival meant never standing still, for to remain in place was to be buried under ice. And yet, these armies of ice gave as much as they took. When they retreated, they revealed raw ground, scraped clean, rich with minerals ground into fine powder. New lakes filled the hollows, rivers surged in freshly carved channels, and plants colonized the barren soil. Life returned quickly, seizing opportunity from devastation. The glaciers were destroyers, but they were also sculptors, carving the foundations of the world we know. In this way, Earth endured not by resisting the glaciers, but by yielding to them, allowing them to shape its bones and skin. The endurance was transformation. The scars of their passage became the landscapes of the future. The Great Lakes of North America, the fertile soils of Europe and China, the rolling hills of New England, all are legacies of the frozen armies. But the glaciers were not the only force. As they marched across the continents, the seas withdrew, exposing new lands that had long been hidden beneath the waves. These revealed landscapes would carry herds, hunters, and legends alike, opening pathways across the globe. To understand what Earth endured, we must follow the oceans as they pulled back, unveiling bridges of land that would connect worlds together. The ice did not only reshape the land, it reshaped the oceans too. When so much of Earth's water was locked away in the frozen armies of the Laurentide and Fennoscandian sheets, the seas retreated as if inhaled by the planet itself. Shorelines stretched outward, bays turned into valleys, islands fused with continents, and in their place appeared new landscapes, broad plains and frozen steppes, that would one day vanish again beneath the returning tide. At the height of the Ice Age, sea levels fell more than 100 metres. Imagine standing on the coast of Europe then. The English Channel was not yet filled with water, but sprawled as a rolling plain called Doggerland. Rivers meandered across its breadth, feeding wetlands rich with game. To its hunters, it was not a land bridge, not a temporary gift of the ice, but a country in its own right. Families lived here, tracking herds of red deer, building fires along riverbanks, watching seasons turn beneath a pale dust-haze sky. Today, their hearthstones rest beneath the North Sea, buried by sand and waves. Farther east lay another frontier, Beringia. It stretched hundreds of kilometres between Siberia and Alaska, a wide expanse of tundra and grassland. Here, caribou and mammoths migrated in endless lines, wolves following close behind. And with them came humans, moving step by step into a new world. They did not know they were crossing from Asia into the Americas. For them, it was simply land. But this crossing would shape the destiny of entire continents. Every footprint pressed into Beringian soil was part of a greater migration, a quiet endurance that carried our species farther than ever before. In the south, Sunda Shelf united the scattered islands of Southeast Asia with the mainland, forming a vast landmass called Sundaland. Forests spread across it, rivers braided through it, and humans roamed its expanse. Australia, New Guinea, and Tasmania were joined together into Sahul, a single continent where marsupial giants still lingered. Across these new lands, echoes of myth may have been born, legends of a time when the sea swallowed entire countries, when villages were drowned, and horizons redrew themselves with water's return. The endurance of Earth in this age was not only the pressure of ice, but the emptiness of seas. Coral reefs stood exposed to air, bleaching and dying as tides withdrew. Estuaries shrank into thin streams. Coastal plains stretched wide, vulnerable to winds that carried dust far inland. And yet, what was lost for the ocean was gained for the land. Fertile soils, rich in nutrients ground fine by glaciers, blanketed the new territories. Grass spread quickly, anchoring the plains, feeding herds that in turn fed predators and people. Imagine walking across Doggerland at dusk. The horizon is flat, the wind sweeping across grass that bends in waves. To the west lies what will one day be the sea, but for now is pasture dotted with ponds. Smoke rises from a distant camp. Children chase each other along the water's edge. And though no one here knows it, their world is temporary, a land on loan from the Ice Age. The stories of these drowned lands endure in whispers. Some see in the flood myths of Mesopotamia, or the tales of sunken lands in Celtic lore, faint memories of Doggerland's fate. Aboriginal traditions in Australia recall rising seas that swallowed coasts. Stories passed down for thousands of years, their details aligning eerily with geological reconstructions. To endure the retreat of the seas was not only to walk across exposed continents, but to witness them vanish again, slowly, century by century, until home itself was gone. The endurance here was fragile. A hunter might walk the same trail as his father, never noticing the sea creeping closer each year. A child might grow old before realizing the river where she once played was widening into an estuary, its banks dissolving beneath salt. The changes were too slow to see, but relentless enough to erase whole worlds. And still, life adapted. Humans followed the herds across the new plains, then retreated to higher ground when waters returned. The land bridges served their purpose, conduits of survival, migration, and memory, before yielding to the ocean. Doggerland sank into the North Sea. Beringia disappeared beneath the Bering Strait. Sundaland fragmented into the islands we know today. Sahul fractured, and Tasmania became an island again. The seas drew back, then returned, reshaping Earth's edges and forcing endurance upon all who lived there. For the planet, it was simply another adjustment of water and ice. For the creatures who called those lands home, It was the end of familiar worlds. Yet even as the seas retreated, another force rose into prominence. The skies themselves shifted. Winds carried dust and ash, turning sunsets pale and coating the ground with layers that would one day feed farms. To understand what Earth endured, we must look upward, toward an atmosphere thick with dust, restless and strange, the sky of the Ice Age. The endurance of the Ice Age was not only written in ice and stone, it drifted above the land, invisible yet omnipresent, carried on winds that never rested. The sky itself bore witness to the age, hazy, pale, and restless with dust. To live beneath it was to breathe the memory of glaciers, ground fine and lifted high, each grain a fragment of rock travelling farther than rivers or herds ever could. When glaciers advanced, they acted as titanic mills, grinding the bedrock beneath them into powder. This dust was finer than sand, lighter than gravel, a substance so small that the wind claimed it with ease. Across the exposed plains left bare by retreating ice, storms swept up the powder, lifting it into clouds that stretched for hundreds of kilometres. The dust settled far from its source, layer upon layer, forming loess deposits that remain today. Blankets of pale soil stretching across northern China, Europe, and the American Midwest. In some places, these deposits are more than 100 meters thick, monuments not to stone walls or pyramids, but to the endurance of wind and ice. To stand beneath an Ice Age sky was to see light dimmed and colors muted. The sun burned through a veil of haze, its warmth weakened, its presence softened. Horizons blurred. The world seemed suspended in a permanent dusk. For the people who lived then, the air itself must have felt foreign. Each breath carried the taste of distant glaciers, each horizon veiled by dust from lands unseen. Paradoxically, the very dust that made skies hazy also laid the foundation for future abundance. Loess soils, though lifeless when first deposited, became astonishingly fertile once plants and microbes colonized them. Thousands of years later, these same plains would feed civilizations, Chinese dynasties rising along the Yellow River, farmers of Europe tilling dark, rich fields. What had been hardship during the Ice Age became a quiet gift across generations, but endurance in that moment was harsh. Imagine a hunter crossing an open steppe. The wind roars across the plain, lifting curtains of dust that sting the eyes and coat the skin. Snow has crusted over the ground, but the storm does not bring new flakes, only grit, swirling, clinging, settling into every crevice of clothing and tool. In the distance, mammoths trudge on, their fur powdered grey by the storm. The sky is neither clear nor clouded, but a shifting veil that makes the land seem endless, indistinct, and strange. The atmosphere of the Ice Age was also thinner in its lifeblood. Carbon dioxide levels dropped to nearly half of what they are today. Plants struggled to grow, their photosynthesis strained by scarcity. The world was colder and drier, its air less capable of holding moisture. Paradoxically, many of the regions near the great ice sheets were deserts of snow and wind, not because the air was warm, but because it was too dry to release flakes. The heart of the Ice Age was not buried in endless snowfall, but scoured, barren, eroded by air that had forgotten how to weep. Volcanoes added their chaos to the sky. From time to time, eruptions filled the atmosphere with ash and sulfur, blocking sunlight and deepening the cold. In the layers of Greenland's ice cores, scientists have found traces of these events, tiny fragments of volcanic glass, silent evidence of years when the sun dimmed and the glaciers pressed forward again. Imagine the fear of seeing the sky grow darker, not just for days, but for summers, crops failing in regions far south of the ice. For those alive then, the world must have seemed to stagger, shifting unpredictably between harsh and harsher. And yet, life found ways. Herds of bison poured through wind-scoured snow to reach grasses laid bare by storms. Predators trailed them, timing their hunts to the weather, knowing that storms left prey weakened and exposed. Humans learned to read the skies, to notice the tilt of light before a dust storm, to shield their eyes and prepare their shelters. To endure the air was as vital as to endure the ice. Even myths may hold echoes of this sky, tales of dimmed suns, of endless twilight, of gods who covered the heavens with veils, may carry the memory of generations who lived beneath an atmosphere of dust. What they saw each day was not the bright blue dome we know, but a restless haze that softened the world into dreamlike shades. The endurance of Earth was written above as much as below. Dust was not only the record of glaciers, but the courier of their story, carrying fragments of their grinding weight across continents. It linked distant lands together, spreading both hardship and fertility. To breathe was to share in the endurance of the whole planet, for the dust of one glacier could settle 1,000 miles away, uniting all beneath the same pale sky. Close your eyes and picture yourself in that world. The horizon is muted, the air sharp with grit. The sun glows faintly, struggling to pierce the haze. Around you the land stretches wide, barren yet alive, its fertility locked in dust waiting for a future it will never see. For those who lived then, every breath was both a burden and a bond with the farthest reaches of the earth. And so the question lingers, if you had lived beneath that restless sky, would you have seen it as a curse, a veil of hardship, or as a hidden blessing, a gift preparing the soils of tomorrow? Share your thoughts below. I'd love to hear your perspective. And if journeys like this fascinate you, consider subscribing so we can continue uncovering the echoes of Earth's forgotten past together. Stretching from the cold plains of Western Europe, across Siberia, and all the way to Alaska, there once lay a land unlike anything we see today. It was not the frozen tundra of the far north, nor the dense forests of warmer climes, but something in between, a vast windswept grassland that scientists now call the mammoth steppe. This was the beating heart of the Ice Age, a place of abundance amid scarcity, where life endured in forms both immense and fragile. Imagine standing in the middle of this steppe. The horizon is endless, a rolling sea of grasses and herbs that hug the ground. There are no trees to break the sky, only the ceaseless wind whispering through the stalks. The air is sharp, dry, laced with dust carried from distant glaciers. Yet the land is alive with movement. Herds of woolly mammoths trudge in long lines, their curved tusks gleaming pale as they sweep aside snow in search of grass. Bison graze in clusters, their thick coats rippling as they shift. Wild horses gallop across the open plain, their hooves striking the frozen ground in a steady rhythm. And among them, solitary and broad-shouldered, the woolly rhinoceroses move like armoured shadows, their horns slicing the air as they push through the drifts. This was the paradox of the mammoth steppe. In a world defined by cold and scarcity, it was astonishingly productive. The grasses that covered the land were tough, low to the ground, and rich in nutrients. They wasted no energy reaching for the sky, but instead stored their strength where the herds could find it. For the mammoths, bison, and horses, these grasses were the foundation of survival. For the predators that followed, they were the promise of prey. Dire wolves prowled at the edges of the herds, their jaws powerful enough to crush bone. Cave lions, leaner but nearly twice the weight of modern lions, stalked across the plains in coordinated groups, their golden coats blending into the pale grass. And then there were the saber-toothed cats, ambush hunters that lurked in low shrubs, their long curved fangs glinting in the weak light. To live on the mammoth steppe was to endure constant vigilance, for danger was always watching, always waiting. Beneath the feet of giants, smaller creatures thrived as well. Lemmings and ground squirrels burrowed beneath the soil, their tunnels forming invisible networks of life. Arctic foxes darted across the steppe, scavenging what they could from the kills of larger predators. Ravens circled overhead, sharp-eyed sentinels of survival. In this vast web, no life was wasted. The endurance of the steppe was collective, each species bound to the others in a cycle of grass, flesh, and bone. Humans entered this stage late, but when they did, they became part of its fabric. Hunters followed the herds, learning their patterns, watching their migrations. In the wind-scoured plains of Ukraine and Russia, people built shelters from the bones of mammoths, rib cages arched into frames, tusks planted as supports, hides stretched tight to block the cold. Fires burned inside, casting light against walls of bone, the flickering glow a fragile defiance against the darkness beyond. For these early humans, The mammoth steppe was both bounty and trial. A successful hunt meant survival, warmth, and the promise of another season. A failed one could mean hunger, frostbite, or death. Spears tipped with stone were thrust into hides thicker than any modern creature bears. Cooperation was essential. One hunter alone could not bring down a beast that weighed as much as a house. In the blood and breath of the chase, humans learned not only to endure, but to become hunters of giants. The mammoth steppe endured for tens of thousands of years, stable in its cold, resilient in its rhythm. Even as glaciers advanced and retreated at its edges, the grasslands remained. But endurance does not mean permanence. When the climate warmed, forests crept northward, shading the grasses, closing the open horizon. Slowly the steppe shrank, its herds pressed into smaller refuges, and with its loss came the unravelling of a world where giants once ruled. Yet traces of this endurance remain. In the frozen permafrost of Siberia, mammoths lie preserved so well that their fur still clings to their hides, their stomachs filled with grass they ate thousands of years ago. Each frozen carcass is a time capsule, a fragment of the steppe preserved in ice. They remind us that the mammoth steppe was not myth, but memory, a land as real as our own, though now vanished. To endure the mammoth steppe was to live in balance with extremes, cold but fertile, harsh but abundant, vast yet fragile. It was a crucible where species were forged into forms we can scarcely imagine today, and it was here that humans learned the skills, hunting, shelter building, cooperation, that would carry them beyond the Ice Age. But endurance on the steppe was not only a matter of chasing prey or surviving storms, it was also about the edge of the glaciers themselves, the cold frontier where humans faced challenges unlike any before. To understand how they lived in such a place, we must follow them to the border of ice, where hunters built homes of bone and stitched their survival into every seam of hide. At the frozen margins of the glaciers, where the winds cut like blades and the horizon was a wall of ice, small bands of humans carved out a life. They were not yet the rulers of their world, but survivors at its edge, learning to bend themselves to the cold. Endurance here meant ingenuity, not brute strength, and it was in these borderlands that some of humanity's most remarkable adaptations began to take shape. Imagine approaching one of their camps. There are no forests nearby, no sturdy timbers to build with, only the bones of giants left behind on the mammoth steppe. Ribs as tall as a man are driven into the ground like pillars. Tusks curve upward, lashed together to form arches. Over these frames, hides are stretched tight, layered thick, their seams stitched with sinew. The shelters hunker low against the wind, round and compact, their entrances narrow tunnels designed to trap warmth. Smoke curls from gaps in the hides, a thin grey thread rising into the pale air. Inside, the fire burns, not only for heat, but for life itself. Fire was the great divider, the fragile line between survival and extinction. Its light gathered families close, their furs pulled around them, their faces flushed with heat. Around its glow, food was roasted, tools were hardened, and stories were told. A single flame meant safety in a world where the dark belonged to predators, and the cold could kill in minutes. For those who lived at the edge of ice, fire was endurance given form, a tether to life against the immensity of winter. But flame alone could not feed them. To survive, they turned to the hunt. Spears tipped with flint and bone were fashioned with care, their edges sharp enough to pierce thick hides. Antler and ivory were carved into barbed points, designed to lodge deep in the flesh of their prey. Hunts were not solitary ventures, they required cooperation. A herd of bison or a mammoth could only be brought down by strategy, hunters driving the animals into narrow valleys toward waiting spears, or into bogs where their massive weight betrayed them. Success meant more than meat. From a single kill came bones for shelter, sinew for thread, fat for fuel, and hides for clothing. The mammoth was not only prey, but partner in survival, its body sustaining the humans who dared to hunt it. Clothing itself was an act of invention. Furs were stitched with bone needles, layered into garments that trapped heat. Boots lined with grasses absorbed sweat and kept feet dry in snow. Gloves were fashioned from hides turned soft through endless scraping. Each piece was tested against the cold, refined over generations, until a human body wrapped in these garments could stand where bare skin would freeze solid in moments. Even so, endurance was fragile. Frostbite, hunger, and predators stalked every step. Families moved with the seasons, following the herds south when winters deepened, venturing north again when the ice retreated. Rivers and coastlines became their guides, the landmarks by which they measured their wandering. Memory was their map, knowledge their inheritance. Around the fire they passed down lessons. Which valley held sheltering cliffs, where herds crossed rivers, which plants could heal and which could poison. Survival was not written, but spoken, remembered, and lived. And yet, amid this struggle, there was beauty. In caves scattered across Europe and Asia, humans left behind paintings of the animals they hunted. Mammoths, horses, bison, etched in ochre and charcoal. These images were not mere decoration. They may have been teaching tools, ways to preserve knowledge of the creature's forms and movements. They may have been rituals, prayers for luck in the hunt, or they may have been something deeper, an expression of awe for the world they inhabited, a way to give meaning to survival. The endurance of these hunters was not only physical but cultural. In their shelters of bone, in their stitched garments, in their art, they began to transform survival into something more. They were no longer merely reacting to the Ice Age, they were shaping their place within it. But the Ice Age offered no safety for long. Beyond the warmth of their fires and the walls of their shelters, predators prowled. Saber-toothed cats, cave lions, and dire wolves moved across the same frozen plains, seeking the same prey. For humans, endurance would also mean facing these hunters of the permafrost, sometimes as rivals, sometimes as shadows, always as a threat at the edge of firelight. The edge of ice was a crucible, and within it, humans discovered more than ways to survive. They discovered ways to shape their world. What they carried with them was not just fire and bone, but memory, imagination, and craft. In the quiet glow of the hearth, endurance became invention, and invention became legacy. Picture the flicker of torchlight deep within a cave. Shadows leap across walls etched with ochre and charcoal. Horses gallop in lines, bison bow their massive heads, mammoths stride with tusks curved like crescents of the moon. Each stroke is deliberate, practiced, alive with motion. These were not idle doodles. They were records, prayers, lessons. They captured the essence of the hunt, the rhythm of the herds, the power of beasts larger than any hunter. In these shapes we see the earliest fusion of survival and story. Endurance found its voice not only in flesh and fire, but in art. Beyond the painted walls, other forms of creativity took shape. Small figurines carved from bone and ivory emerged. Stylized women with broad hips and rounded forms, now called Venus figurines. Their purpose remains mysterious. Were they fertility charms, symbols of survival through generations, or embodiments of a world where warmth and life were precarious? Whatever their meaning, they reveal a truth. Even in the bitter cold, humans did more than endure. They imagined. They created symbols that outlasted their makers. Tools, too, evolved in this age of cold. Early stone flakes gave way to blades long and slender, sharper and more efficient. Spears tipped with these blades could pierce the hides of mammoths. Scrapers smoothed furs into supple clothing. Awls pierced holes for stitching, making garments that clung tight against the wind. Bone and antler were shaped into barbed points, fishhooks, and ornaments. Every tool was a lesson embodied, knowledge passed down from one generation to the next. The control of fire also deepened. What had once been a flame stolen from lightning or preserved embers became a force they could summon at will. Striking flint against pyrite, they coaxed sparks into tinder, breath into flame. No longer dependent on chance, humans carried fire in their hands, a mastery that transformed endurance into agency. With fire, they cooked meat, hardened spear points, and extended their waking hours into the long nights of the Ice Age. Around it, they sang, taught, and remembered. Memory was as important as meat. Without writing, knowledge had to live in stories. Around the fire, hunters recounted the chase, the signs of prey, the dangers of the land. Elders passed down lessons about the stars above, the river's paths, and the plants that healed or harmed. Each story was both instruction and inheritance, a survival guide woven into narrative. This oral chain was fragile, yet enduring, stretching across centuries, each voice keeping the past alive for the future. Endurance here was not only about bodies hardened against the cold, but about minds sharpened by necessity. Humans learned to look at stone and see a tool, to look at fire and see possibility, to look at an animal and see not only prey but meaning. Each act of creation, whether a painting, a figurine, or a tool, was an answer to the Ice Age, a declaration that survival was more than existence. But beyond the firelight, the world still held dangers that no tool or song could fully banish. The predators of the permafrost stalked the same plains, their eyes gleaming in the dim light, their strength honed by the same cold. To understand the true weight of endurance, we must step beyond the shelters and into the shadow of these hunters, where survival meant living alongside creatures built to kill. The Ice Age was not only a world of herds and hunters with fire, it was also the domain of predators, creatures forged by the cold into instruments of perfect survival. To endure on these frozen plains was to live with constant awareness that danger lurked beyond the circle of firelight, moving silently through the snow. Foremost among these hunters were the saber-toothed cats. Their very image has become a symbol of the Ice Age. Massive fangs like ivory daggers, jaws designed not for long chases but for sudden ambush. Their stocky bodies and powerful shoulders told the story of how they hunted. They waited in the low shrubs or the edges of valleys until prey wandered too close. Then they lunged, fangs plunging deep before the victim could even run. For the humans of the steppe, to stumble across the path of a saber-tooth was to feel the balance tilt instantly from hunter to hunted. Yet they were not alone. The cave lions prowled in groups, larger and leaner than any lions alive today. Imagine a pack of them fanning out across the snow, golden coats dimmed beneath a pale sky, their paws leaving no sound on the frozen ground. These lions could take down mammoths young or bison full grown. To see them advance in unison must have been like watching the earth itself move. And then there were the dire wolves. Heavier and more powerful than modern wolves, their jaws could crush bone with terrifying ease. They followed the great herds for miles, working as a pack to wear down prey until exhaustion brought the kill. To the humans who shared the same plains, their howls rolling across the night were both a warning and a reminder. This world belonged to more than one kind of hunter. Even smaller predators carried their own weight in the ecology of fear. Wolverines, fierce, relentless, fearless, could drive animals many times their size from a kill. Foxes darted at the edges of hunts, stealing scraps wherever they could. Raptors circled overhead, their sharp eyes watching for signs of weakness, ready to descend when blood stained the snow. The Ice Age did not waste. Every predator, great or small, claimed its place in the endless cycle of survival. For humans, endurance in this world meant coexistence with these hunters. A band tracking bison might find themselves shadowed by a pack of dire wolves. A fresh mammoth carcass could draw not only scavengers, but lions or saber-tooths unwilling to share. To scavenge, to hunt, to even move across the steppe required constant vigilance. One misstep could turn hunter into prey, and yet humans learned. Spears gave them reach. Fire gave them a weapon no predator wished to face. Together these tools shifted the balance. Slowly people became rivals rather than prey. Still, this was not dominance. It was a truce of necessity, an uneasy coexistence where every meal was contested and every night was guarded by flame. Imagine sitting at the edge of a campfire. Beyond the ring of light, the night is silent, yet you feel the presence of eyes. A wolf's howl pierces the stillness. The fire cracks and you pull your furs tighter, knowing the warmth keeps more than cold at bay. Just beyond the glow, the predators of the permafrost wait, testing the edges of endurance. In this balance of fear and survival, humans sharpened not only their spears but their minds. They learned the value of cooperation, of voices raised together, of strategy and patience. Endurance became community. The predators taught them that alone they were fragile, but together they could stand against the cold and the teeth in the dark. But predators were not the only giants of this world. Across the continents roamed creatures so immense and strange they seem almost mythical. Sloths the size of cars, rhinoceroses covered in wool, bears taller than men on horseback. To endure the Ice Age was also to share it with these giants, whose very presence reshaped the land and the lives of those who followed them. Everywhere the ice extended its reach, life responded not with diminishment, but with enormity. The Ice Age was a theatre of giants, a time when survival often meant growing larger, stronger, and stranger than ever before. To endure was to expand, and the result was a world peopled by creatures that would seem mythical if not for the bones and frozen bodies they left behind. On the open grasslands of the mammoth steppe, the mammoths were only the beginning. Alongside them moved the woolly rhinoceroses, broad-shouldered and cloaked in dense fur, their horns sweeping forward like natural lances. They were formidable, powerful enough to drive away predators and to plough through snow in search of buried grasses. Imagine standing in their path, a wall of muscle and horn advancing steadily across the tundra. They were endurance embodied, armoured against the cold and the hunger that defined the age. The bison of the Ice Age were larger than their modern descendants, their heads massive, their humps towering, their coats thick enough to shrug off snowstorms. Wild horses, smaller in frame but gathered in tight galloping herds, churned the ground into frozen thunder. Musk oxen formed defensive rings against predators, their shaggy hides catching the frost as if they carried the tundra upon their backs. Each of these herds was an expression of abundance forged in hardship, tens of thousands of animals grazing, moving, enduring. Farther south, the giants multiplied. In the forests and plains of the Americas, mastodons, cousins of the mammoth, moved among the trees, stripping bark from trunks with their flexible trunks and straight tusks. Giant ground sloths, some the size of small cars, lumbered slowly across the land, their claws tearing into roots and branches. They were strange, deliberate creatures, their very existence a reminder that endurance took many forms. Armadillos as large as Volkswagens, called glyptodonts, shuffled along in armoured shells, their heavy tails swinging like clubs capable of breaking bones. But where there were herbivores, predators followed. The short-faced bear of North America towered over any bear alive today, its long limbs built for speed, its presence alone enough to scatter wolves from a kill. To see such a bear rear up must have been to face a mountain that moved. In Australia, the marsupial lion, a predator unlike anything else on Earth, prowled through eucalyptus forests, its jaws powerful enough to crush bone. There, too, roamed giant kangaroos, towering over their modern kin, and flightless birds heavier than ostriches, stalking the open country with steps that shook the earth. Even the oceans were not exempt. Sea levels had fallen, exposing coastlines and shallows, but in the waters that remained swam creatures of scale. Along the Pacific Rim, Stella's sea cow, a cousin of the manatee, drifted in herds, some growing longer than a small boat. Off the coasts of South America, penguins the height of a man dove through the waves. Sharks patrolled the depths, their teeth as sharp and timeless as they had been for millions of years. The endurance of giants was not bound to land alone. The sheer density of life in this age is difficult to imagine. Picture yourself standing on a ridge above the steppe. Before you stretches an ocean of motion, mammoths pushing through snow, bison crowding the horizon, horses galloping in streams of hooves, rhinos ploughing their way across the wind. In the distance, predators stalk, their silhouettes patient and purposeful. Above, vultures circle, waiting for the inevitable. The land trembles beneath the weight of life. This was not emptiness, but abundance on a scale almost unthinkable. Yet endurance was fragile. The giants were bound to the cold, to the grasses of the steppe, to the rhythm of glaciers that sustained their world. A warming climate began to unravel that balance. Forests spread into open plains, shrinking the ranges of mammoths and rhinos. Swamps replaced grasslands, cutting away at the habitats of giant sloths and glyptodonts. For creatures evolved to thrive in one kind of world, endurance had limits. Humans added to the strain. With fire and sharpened tools, small bands of hunters could challenge even the largest beasts. In North America, mammoth kill sites reveal entire herds brought down through strategy and cooperation. In South America, bones of giant sloths bear marks of butchery. Across continents, evidence whispers the same story. As humans spread, giants vanished. Whether by direct hunting or by altering landscapes with fire and overuse, our ancestors became a force equal to climate itself. But the question endures: were the giants doomed by the Earth's shifting breath or by the hands of humans? Perhaps both. Climate shrank their world. Humans pressed upon the survivors. Between them the balance broke, and in that breaking, silence spread. Imagine the last of them, a lone mastodon pushing through thinning woods, a giant sloth searching for leaves in a forest where trees grow too densely for its bulk, a short-faced bear pacing an empty plain, its prey gone. The silence would be as heavy as the creatures themselves, a reminder that even giants can fail to endure. Yet the legacy of these giants remains. Their bones fill museums, their images linger in myths of monsters and beasts. Their absence reshaped the ecosystems they once ruled. Without mammoths, forests advanced unchecked. Without glyptodonts, the balance of grazing shifted. Without giant predators, the role of apex hunter fell to humans. The disappearance of giants was not only extinction, it was inheritance. The Ice Age tested endurance through size, through scale, through abundance on a grand stage. But endurance alone was not enough. The giants teach us that to survive is not only to grow stronger, but to adapt. Those who could not change faded into memory. Those who could endured into a new age. And so the question is left for us. Do you believe the giants were undone more by the Earth's shifting climate or by the rise of humankind? Share your thoughts below. I'd love to hear where you stand. And if journeys like this spark your imagination, consider subscribing so we can continue uncovering the echoes of Earth's forgotten past together. The story of endurance is rarely a straight line. Sometimes the Earth moves forward into warmth, only to be pulled back into the cold as if by some unseen hand. Such was the case 12,000 years ago when the Ice Age seemed to be loosening its grip. Glaciers were retreating, forests were returning, rivers ran swollen with meltwater. Life was on the cusp of change. And then suddenly, the world froze again. This reversal is known as the Younger Dryas, a millennium-long relapse into near-glacial conditions. For the people who lived through it, it must have felt like betrayal. Generations had watched the land thaw, animals spread into new pastures, and warmth promised stability. But just as swiftly, the ice reclaimed its hold. Grass withered, forests shrank. The air grew sharp and brittle once more. The world paused in the balance, and everything endured another trial. What caused this shock remains one of science's most enduring mysteries. Some evidence points to the oceans. As glaciers melted, vast lakes of freshwater pooled across the continents. When their icy dams broke, torrents rushed into the seas, disrupting the currents that carried warmth around the globe. The North Atlantic grew colder, its waters less able to draw heat northward, plunging Europe back into winter. Others point to the skies, to the possibility of a comet or asteroid breaking apart in the atmosphere, scattering fire and debris, triggering global cooling. The truth may be a combination. Earth's own rhythms amplified by catastrophe. In North America, a strange layer in the soil tells part of the story. Known as the black mats, these bands of dark sediment are rich in soot, microspherules, and nanodiamonds, tiny traces some scientists believe were forged in an extraterrestrial impact. Beneath these layers lie the bones of mammoths and other megafauna. Above them, their remains vanish. To some, this is evidence of a cosmic blow that shattered ecosystems. To others, it is simply the record of climate itself tightening the noose. Either way, the black mats are a scar, a mark of sudden change that life had to endure. For the people of that time, The Younger Dryas was a crucible. Hunters who had begun to settle near rivers and lakes found their food sources dwindling. Crops that might have been first experiments in cultivation withered. Survival demanded mobility once again. Families abandoned promising valleys, chasing herds into colder lands, relearning the endurance of their ancestors. In the Fertile Crescent, where the warmth had once encouraged settlement, communities gathered seeds, storing them against scarcity. Some scholars believe this stress played a role in the birth of agriculture itself, a desperate innovation forged in the shadow of returning cold. Imagine walking through a valley during this sudden reversal. The grass that once grew lush is brittle, its colour fading. Rivers once swollen now run sluggish, rimmed with ice. The air bites deeper than it should for the season. You hear fewer birds, see fewer herds. The promise of warmth has been withdrawn, and in its place lies a silence that feels both ancient and new. For those who endured, the world must have seemed uncertain, its rules shifting, its patience running thin. The Younger Dryas reminds us that endurance is not progress but resilience. The Earth did not march smoothly into the present climate. It stumbled, faltered, froze again. Life did not collapse but it strained. Myths of sudden winters, of endless cold returning without warning, may be echoes of this time. For thousands of years afterward, the memory lingered in story and fear, that the warmth could vanish again, that the earth could betray its own spring. But even the Younger Dryas had an end. Around 11,500 years ago, the world began to warm once more. This time the thaw held. The glaciers retreated with greater urgency, rivers roared with meltwater, and seas began their long rise. Yet the retreat was not gentle. In the wake of the Younger Dryas came floods of unimaginable scale, bursts of water that carved valleys in days, that redrew coastlines, that delivered the final shocks of the Ice Age. When the ice finally began to yield, it did not slip away quietly. It broke apart with violence, releasing torrents of water that thundered across continents. These were not ordinary floods, not rivers swollen by spring rains or storm surges driven by winds. They were cataclysms, the outpouring of entire inland seas trapped for centuries behind walls of ice. To endure the end of the Ice Age was to endure water unleashed in volumes so immense that they remade the face of the earth. In North America, one of the greatest of these catastrophes began with a lake larger than all the Great Lakes combined. Glacial Lake Agassiz stretched across the heart of the continent, its waters held back by the retreating edge of the Laurentide ice sheet. For centuries it waited, pressing against its icy walls. And then, as the climate warmed, those walls failed. The lake surged outward in a flood beyond imagining. Valleys drowned within hours. Torrents miles wide tore across the land, sweeping boulders like pebbles, scouring the earth to bedrock. Rivers we know today, like the Mississippi, were reshaped, their courses redefined by forces that dwarfed them. Farther west, the Missoula floods left their scars on the landscape of the Pacific Northwest. Behind an icy dam in present-day Montana, a massive lake formed, holding back more than 2,000 cubic kilometers of water. When the ice gave way, the flood raced across the land at speeds nearing 100 kilometers an hour. Walls of water hundreds of feet high tore across Washington, gouging out the Columbia River Gorge, leaving behind the scablands, landscapes etched with channels so immense they puzzled geologists for generations. This was not the slow patience of glaciers, but the sudden fury of their undoing. Europe bore its own upheavals. As the ice retreated, meltwater pooled in vast basins. Some lakes drained in violent bursts, carving new rivers, cutting through valleys, redrawing maps in weeks. In Siberia, immense lakes once filled what are now dry plains, their waters dammed by ice that eventually yielded, sending torrents surging across the steppe. The marks remain in the land, giant spillways, dry channels, and shorelines etched into hillsides, the remnants of vanished seas. For those who lived then, these floods must have seemed like the wrath of gods. Camps and hunting grounds would vanish overnight. Valleys that had provided food and shelter for generations disappeared beneath water, leaving survivors scrambling for higher ground. Myths of great floods, Echoes found in Mesopotamian epics, Native American traditions, and Aboriginal stories may carry fragments of these memories, passed down through centuries as warnings wrapped in story. The endurance of Earth during these floods was both destruction and renewal. What was swept away left behind fresh plains, newly scoured soils, and networks of lakes and rivers. Life returned quickly to these raw landscapes. Grasses sprouted in the silt-rich ground. Herds followed. Humans returned as well, adapting once more, finding opportunity in the chaos. The very floods that devastated them also created the fertile corridors where future civilizations would rise. Imagine standing on a ridge above one of these floods. The roar is deafening, a constant thunder as walls of water consume the land. Trees snap like twigs, boulders roll like dice, and the air is filled with spray and mist. You feel the ground trembling beneath the torrent, as if the earth itself is shuddering under the weight of its release. There is no stopping it, no slowing it, only survival in its wake. The floods were not isolated events, but a pattern, part of the Ice Age's final unravelling. Each one a step toward the world we know, each one a wound and a promise. In their aftermath came new landscapes, new rivers, new possibilities. They were the last convulsions of a frozen planet giving way to warmth. But with the floods came loss. For the giants of the Ice Age, the mammoths, the saber-tooths, the giant sloths, the changing world was too much. Their endurance faltered as climate shifted and humans pressed harder upon them. The waters that carved valleys also marked the twilight of the megafauna. To understand the full cost of endurance, we must witness the vanishing of giants. The Ice Age had been a world of titans, mammoths with tusks like crescent moons, woolly rhinoceroses with armoured hides, dire wolves with jaws built for crushing bone. They had endured the cold, thrived on the mammoth steppe, and walked the same paths as humans for thousands of years. But as the glaciers withdrew and the climate shifted, the giants began to falter. Their endurance, once a symbol of strength, became fragile, and one by one they disappeared. The first blow came from the land itself, the mammoth steppe, that vast expanse of grassland stretching from Europe across Asia and into North America began to shrink. Warmer temperatures drew forests northward. Trees spread where grasses once dominated, shading out the low plants that had fed immense herds. For creatures built for open plains, the encroaching woods were prisons. Mammoths could not navigate dense forests. Steppe bison lost the endless pastures that sustained them. Horses and rhinoceroses found their ranges fractured into scattered fragments. Predators followed their prey into decline. Saber-toothed cats, once feared ambush hunters, dwindled as the herds they depended on vanished. Dire wolves, too, suffered when mammoth and bison herds grew scarce. Even the mighty cave lions who had prowled the frozen plains disappeared into memory. The unravelling of the giants was not only a loss of individual species, but a collapse of entire ecosystems. Yet climate alone did not seal their fate. At the same time, humans were spreading across the globe with tools sharper, strategies more refined, and populations larger than ever before. What had once been rare and dangerous hunts became deliberate, organised campaigns. Archaeological sites across North America reveal the bones of mammoths split for marrow, their meat stripped clean by stone blades. In Siberia, frozen mammoths have been discovered with wounds carved by human weapons. On Wrangel Island, a tiny population of mammoths clung to survival for thousands of years after their mainland kin had vanished, slowly dwindling in size, becoming smaller, weaker, until even they disappeared. Some scholars argue it was hunting alone, a slow but relentless pressure from humans, that drove the giants into extinction. Others insist the warming climate played the central role. Most now believe it was the combination. Giants already strained by shrinking habitats were pushed past the brink by hunters who had learned to coordinate, to plan, to endure through ingenuity. For the people of that time, the vanishing of giants must have felt both boon and burden. A mammoth kill could feed a band for weeks, but the herds grew harder to find. Each hunt carried greater risk, each journey stretched farther. Slowly the giants became rarer, until their presence shifted from daily reality to distant memory. Around the fires, stories may have lingered, tales of animals larger than houses, of battles fought with tooth and tusk. But for the children listening, those stories would become myth, for they would never see such creatures alive. The extinction of the giants reshaped the earth as much as the melting of glaciers. Without mammoths to trample the grasslands, forests spread more quickly. Without herds of bison in vast numbers, predators lost their balance. Ecosystems adjusted, shifting toward the forms we know today. But the world was quieter, emptier. The thunder of herds was gone. The presence of creatures that seemed immortal had been extinguished. Imagine the last mammoth standing on a lonely plain. Around it the grass grows thin, the horizon empty. The calls of its kind no longer echo across the land. Its great tusks sweep the air, but no herd answers. It endures alone, a living relic of a vanished world. In time, even it will fall, leaving only bones and silence. The vanishing of giants was not the end of endurance, but its transformation. Humans carried forward the lessons learned in hunting them: cooperation, strategy, adaptation. The earth carried forward the scars they left behind: fossilized bones, frozen remains, whispers in the soil. But the age of megafauna was closing. As the giants faded, the forests crept ever northward. Valleys once open to the sky grew shaded by birch, pine, and oak. For humans, endurance would now mean a different kind of life. Not the chase across endless plains, but the pursuit of deer in shadowed woods, the gathering of plants in fertile valleys. The Ice Age was ending, and with it, the Age of Titans. The roar of herds faded. Where once the horizon rippled with mammoths and bison, a quieter transformation unfolded. The world softened. Green replaced white, and trees began to reclaim the land. The Ice Age, with its endless plains of dust and grass, gave way to forests creeping northward, reshaping Earth into forms that would look more familiar to us today. To endure now meant adjusting not to cold alone, but to abundance that carried its own challenges. The change began subtly. As glaciers retreated, meltwater carved valleys and spread silt across the land. In these raw soils pioneers appeared: birch and pine, hardy trees able to root in poor ground and withstand cold. They were the vanguard, spreading across once barren plains, their trunks thin but resilient. Soon, oaks, elms, and other broadleaf trees followed, weaving canopies that shaded out grasses. Valleys that had echoed with the thunder of hooves now grew hushed beneath leaves. The mammoth steppe shrank into memory, and in its place rose woodlands. The return of forests transformed everything. Animals adapted, shifted, or vanished. Deer spread into the new woods, their smaller bodies well suited to weaving between trees. Wild boar rooted through the undergrowth. Elk and moose moved into shadowed wetlands. Predators followed. Wolves became stealthier hunters, no longer chasing across open ground but stalking silently among trunks. Even birds changed, filling the canopy with song where once only wind had howled. For humans, the forests were both gift and trial. The open plains had demanded endurance against exposure and hunger, but they had also offered clarity: the horizon wide, prey visible from afar. In the forests, sightlines shortened, danger lurked unseen, and hunts required new strategies. The bow and arrow emerged, weapons designed for accuracy at distance in places where throwing spears was hindered by trees. Traps and snares grew more sophisticated, set along game trails worn through the undergrowth. Survival meant not chasing giants, but adapting to swifter, subtler prey. Settlements too began to change. Rivers swelled with glacial melt, their valleys rich with nutrients carried down from the ice. Humans lingered near these waters, fishing, gathering plants, and hunting the animals drawn to their banks. What had once been a life of endless movement became slower, more rooted. In some places, the first experiments in cultivation began: seeds scattered, tended, remembered. The forests did not only provide food and shelter, they offered the possibility of something new: stability. Imagine walking through one of these returning forests. The ground is damp with moss, the air heavy with the scent of pine and earth. Light filters through leaves, dappling the path. A deer moves silently ahead, vanishing between trunks before you can raise your bow. The wind no longer scours the plain, but whispers through branches. It is a different world, not harsher, but transformed. For those who had lived their lives on the mammoth steppe, the forest must have felt alien, its endurance requiring new eyes, new skills, new patience. The earth itself endured this shift by becoming fertile. Floodplains spread, wetlands blossomed, lakes filled the hollows left by ice. Fish thrived in the waters, birds nested in the reeds, and humans followed. What had been a scarred and scoured land became a patchwork of abundance. The very destruction of the Ice Age had laid the foundation for renewal. Yet this renewal was not a simple rebirth. It came with loss. The giants gone, the plains diminished, the sky no longer filled with dust, but with the softer haze of summer warmth. Endurance had changed form. Where once it was survival against wind and snow, it now became adaptation to shifting landscapes, to forests advancing step by step, to rivers drawing new lines across the earth. In the end, the forest's return marked more than the close of the Ice Age. It set the stage for humanity's future. Within these woods, by these rivers, on these fertile plains, people began to plant, to settle, to dream of permanence. The Ice Age had tested endurance with cold and hunger. The New World would test it with possibility. But even as the forests spread, reminders of the frozen age remained. In the stones and soils, in the bones preserved beneath permafrost, the marks of glaciers lingered. To truly grasp what Earth endured, we must turn to these traces, silent witnesses in stone and bone, evidence of a frozen past still written into the world we walk today. The Ice Age may have ended, but it never truly vanished. Its presence lingers all around us, etched into the land, sealed in the soil, and buried within the bones of creatures long gone. To walk across the modern world is to walk through its ghost, for every valley, every lake, every shard of fossil still carries the weight of frozen time. These traces are the memory of endurance, the evidence of what the earth once bore. Look first to the landforms. Across North America and Europe, broad U-shaped valleys stretch between mountains, unmistakable signatures of glaciers. Where rivers carved narrow V's, ice carved deep and wide, flattening the bottoms, steepening the sides. Fjords in Norway, the Great Glen in Scotland, the valleys of the Alps, all are scars left by the slow, grinding passage of ice. To see them today is to glimpse the hand of glaciers still shaping the world, even though the ice itself is gone. Scattered across plains sit boulders far from any mountain that could have birthed them. These are glacial erratics, carried for hundreds of kilometers within frozen walls, then dropped when the ice melted. Some are the size of houses, standing alone like monuments in fields, silent reminders of journeys too vast for human imagination. Farmers ploughing their land stumble upon them still, obstacles planted by forces that left their mark 10,000 years ago. Then there are the lakes. The Great Lakes of North America, vast inland seas holding 1/5 of the planet's fresh water, exist because the Laurentide ice sheet scoured out their basins. Countless smaller lakes across Scandinavia, Canada, and Russia tell the same story. Hollows carved by glaciers, then filled with meltwater as the ice withdrew. Every ripple on their surfaces is a continuation of an Ice Age story. Beneath our feet, more subtle traces lie. Loess plains built from dust carried by ancient winds spread across northern China, the American Midwest, and Europe. These pale, fertile soils, hundreds of feet deep in places, were laid grain by grain during the coldest millennia. Today, they feed some of the richest farmland on Earth. Each harvest is an echo of glacial endurance, sustenance born from ancient hardship. But perhaps the most haunting traces are in ice itself. Beneath Greenland and Antarctica, deep cores preserve bubbles of air trapped hundreds of thousands of years ago. Scientists drill these frozen archives, pulling slender cylinders of time to the surface. Each layer records the breath of the Earth, the composition of its atmosphere, the dust of distant winds, the ashes of volcanic eruptions. In these cores, the Ice Age is not myth but measurement, written in crystalline silence. And then there are the bones. From Siberia's permafrost emerge mammoths still clothed in fur, their flesh preserved, their stomachs filled with grasses last eaten 30,000 years ago. In tar pits like La Brea, the remains of dire wolves and saber-toothed cats lie entangled, victims of hunger and entrapment. In European caves, skulls of cave lions and bears rest where ancient hunters once ventured. Each fossil is a fragment of endurance, a body that once breathed the air of a colder earth. Imagine holding a mammoth's tusk in your hands. Its surface is etched with growth lines, each one a year lived through winter and scarcity. Or picture standing in a U-shaped valley, the walls rising sheer around you, silent witnesses to the grinding weight of vanished glaciers. These traces are not only evidence, they are memory. They are the Earth's way of speaking across time, reminding us of what it has survived. But the most profound trace may be within ourselves. Our DNA carries echoes of the Ice Age, bottlenecks that reveal how few our ancestors once were, genes that helped us metabolize fat in cold climates, fragments of Neanderthal and Denisovan heritage interwoven through encounters in glacial refuges. We are, in part, shaped by the endurance of those who came before, written into our very blood. To study these traces is to realize that the Ice Age is not gone. It breathes beneath our feet, flows in our rivers, grows in our crops, and lives in our bones. The Earth endured, and in enduring, it left a map of scars and gifts. Every stone, every fossil, every valley is an invitation to remember. And yet, even as we study these remnants, there is something more. The traces point not only backward but forward. They remind us that Earth changes quickly, that climates shift, that seas rise and fall. The Ice Age is not a closed chapter, but a prologue. To listen to its echoes is to hear a warning, a whisper of how fragile endurance can be. Now, as we approach the end of this journey, we step into the final reflection. Beyond the scars and the fossils lies something less tangible but more enduring, the echo of frozen time itself, a reminder that the Ice Age never truly ended. It lingers in silence, waiting to be heard. If you could walk back into the Ice Age now, you would first notice the silence. Not the silence of stillness, but of vastness, the kind of quiet that settles over plains so wide they swallow sound, over glaciers so immense they seem eternal. The wind would move, the snow would fall, yet beneath it all you would feel a deeper stillness, as if time itself had slowed. This is the echo of frozen time, and though the Ice Age has ended, its presence has never truly left us. The Earth carries its memory. In the valleys carved to wide U's, in the erratics stranded on plains, in the fertile loess soils that sustain our farms, we still touch the handiwork of ice. Every glass of water drawn from the Great Lakes, every field ploughed in the Midwest, every fjord visited in Scandinavia is an inheritance from that frozen era. These are not remnants of the past alone, but living legacies woven into our present. The echo persists in the far north, where tundra stretches beneath pale skies and permafrost guards bones of mammoths and fragments of ancient plants. It lingers in the DNA carried within us, the traces of bottlenecks and interbreeding with Neanderthals and Denisovans, events written into our bodies by the pressures of cold and scarcity. We are shaped by the Ice Age not as a distant chapter, but as a formative crucible in which our species learned to endure. Even the atmosphere holds the mark. The patterns of winds and currents, the very systems that bring storms and rains, were shifted by the glaciers that once pressed upon continents. The land continues to rise in places freed from ice, a slow rebound that began thousands of years ago and has yet to finish. The Earth still adjusts, still exhales from the burden it carried. And so the Ice Age endures not only in stone and water, but in us. In our migrations across land bridges now drowned, in our myths of floods and endless winters, in our instinct to gather around fire, to tell stories in the dark. These are echoes carried forward, reminders of when survival was not guaranteed, when every spark, every hunt, every memory passed down was part of the fragile balance between life and death. To pause on a winter's night, when the air is sharp and the stars shimmer above a frozen field, is to feel this echo, the chill on your skin, the crunch of frost beneath your feet, the hush of the world muffled by snow, all are faint whispers of a time when such moments stretched unbroken for millennia. The Ice Age is gone, but it is not finished. It lingers in the quiet weight of time, reminding us how swiftly worlds can change, how deeply endurance can shape both land and life. And perhaps that is the truest lesson. Endurance is never passive. It is patience, adaptation, transformation. The Earth endured the Ice Age not by resisting, but by reshaping itself. Life endured not by remaining the same, but by evolving, by imagining, by creating meaning even in hardship. Out of ice came rivers, forests, and fertile plains. Out of scarcity came art, story, and the beginnings of human culture. Out of frozen time came the world we walk today. So as we leave this journey behind, the echo remains. It hums in the valleys, rests in the soils, whispers in the myths we tell, and beats within our own blood. The Ice Age never truly ends. It lingers, silent, patient, eternal, waiting for us to remember.